Hi, I'm Kendra Cunov, and this is John Wineland. And we want to talk about pillar number 2 in the six, remind me what it is, the 6 pillars of,
Pillars of powerful relationship work.
6 pillars of powerful relationship work. And the second pillar is about conducting love through your body.
Yeah, learn how to conduct love through your body. Sounds simple, but it's not as simple as it sounds. It's not as easy as it sounds. And the idea is for us to become aware, to become aware of the way that we habitually either give love or close in the giving of love, in our daily lives and in our relationships. And so, you and I just talked about some questions we could ask to get people to think about that. And I think that's a good way for us to get into this topic, is just have some questions where people can start to think, okay, how do I want to receive love? How do I close my heart or tighten my body when I'm scared to give my love fully, or I'm resentful, or I'm X, or I'm Y? I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and just to set a little context for even where the questions would come from is really holding it in the range of there being these infinite ways actually to express love. And I mean, when we talk about the body, there's the physicality of it, but it's this wide tool, if you will, or space of conducting, and it's the front and the back and the side, and then that we get into these grooves of how we know how to give and receive love. Mm-hmm. And there are certain ways that we just don't, out of fear or lack of practice or
habit.
It's possible, habit.
Yeah.
So we want to use these questions and then talk a little bit more from those, really, is how to even expand the ideas of how we might be able to conduct love through our body, through our whole being.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what's the first question that we came up with?
So the first place to start is actually just thinking about what are the ways that you might like to receive love, and especially the ways that maybe you don't get to receive love on a regular basis. So there might be the ways you like to receive love, but that you do, that comes to you, or that your partner does love you in those ways. But imagining what are the ways that you would actually like to be receiving love that you're not.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to get specific. Like, do I want him to touch me firmly? Do I want him to grab my shoulders and pull him towards me? Do I want him to caress me? Do I want him to speak softly in my ear? Do I want him to, command me from across the room? Do I want to, everybody's nervous system and body's different. So I don't think people normally actually get aware of, oh, well, here's how I want to be touched. Here's how I want to feel love expressed through my partner's body to me. And I think that when we turn on that question and start to ask questions like that, we become aware of a whole range of desires that, that we may not have ever thought about.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was actually thinking, oh, this is like something you should go take, half an hour or something, take a piece of paper and just start writing, right? Like everything right. That comes up. You might start to notice themes, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, there's this quality of love. There's right. all specifics, but there's this quality of love that I'm desiring. But it only comes when you really start, listing it all out, that you can start to see those
right.
things.
I love that exercise. I think that's a great exercise. So anybody watching this, go do that. Like, just take a piece of paper, put some pause, take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and write down all of the ways that you would like to receive love, how you'd like to hear love, how you'd like to feel love, do you want it to be tender? Do you want it to be fierce? Do you want it to be, what's the quality and the texture of love that you'd like to experience? And, part of embodiment work is, the idea of embodiment work is that we can train our bodies to take these esoteric concepts and actually make them real through the body so that people can feel them. And I think this is a really good example. How do we know, how do our partners know if we don't tell them or ask for it or know ourselves?
Right, right. So if you've come back and you've written your own list, it's like, then imagine that your partner or your ideal partner, right, has also written their list. And if you look at your list, you can think of all the reasons why you don't share that, why you don't ask for it, why you don't say that these things. They have all the same reasons. They're their own flavor of reasons. Sure. But they're all the same. You know, they're afraid you're going to say no. They're afraid they're going to look stupid. They're afraid they're going to do it wrong. They're afraid this is like a bad kind of love to want. You know, so there's something wrong with them that they want to be loved in that way.
I've never done it that way. I don't know how to do it that way, or I don't know how to ask for it that way.
And I just want to clarify as we get into this, because it certainly is, you know, like this certainly includes sexual and being loved sexually, but it's much broader than that. So there is specifically being loved sexually, you know, or even if it is like when you talked about the quality of fierce love, for instance, right? And you might even, maybe your list includes things that are physically fierce, but there's also just the quality, right? And your partner doesn't even have to touch you to bring that quality of love.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could spend all day playing in those qualities of giving each other those qualities of love without ever touching each other, right? And it's very nourishing and it's very deep, and it's obviously happening through the body. So why don't you indulge our listeners in like a little, like something for you, like how do you like to receive love? Like what's the texture, the quality?
I know, I'm on the spot.
Yeah. Inquiring minds want to know.
Well, it's funny. I had this, so I went on a date last night, and I've never met this guy before, so I didn't really know. We didn't know each other at all. We didn't have any context for it. But there was the moment at the beginning when he was ordering something, and he was like, "Oh, you know, wait, do you actually, you know, do you like that? Do you like?" It was like sparkling water, so it was very, very mundane. Sort of like, "Oh, you know, now you just command you to drink sparkling water, like that's what you're going to have." And I noticed I was kind of like, "Well, actually, you know, I'm kind of like that. So go right ahead. Actually, you could order the whole meal for us." And I think there is that quality of actually just. I don't know if it actually is the quality of command or if it's just leadership.
Yeah.
Taken care of, you know, sort of like, I mean, I think I'm lucky that I don't have a lot of food restrictions or these, but I'm pretty easy in the sense, like if somebody actually is just going to take control and lead somewhere, like I'm pretty good with most things as long as they're confident.
Yeah.
I
think that's a great point, because what you've just described is that you enjoy the texture of love that is, I've got this.
Yes.
Right? I've got this, right? Most people don't think that that's actually a texture of love that can be expressed, obviously not just through the body, but the man that you were with embodied, let me take care of this, I got this, right? And then you receive that as love.
Yes.
Or care, right? And if you guys were partners long term, right, the I've got this thing would be something that could be expanded into vacations and dates and lovemaking and all of it, but the texture is still the same. It's the
yes,
yeah.
And I do think that it really, I mean, certainly it gets expressed through words or through actions, but there is I'm realizing as you're talking, especially then the reasons why somebody might not do that, they actually do live in the body. And this is why we're talking about how to conduct love through your body. Because, I mean, I imagine that you could say a lot about this, but I imagine being the partner who's going to hold the I've got this. And I'm like, oh, what if I fuck up? And then I sort of like, there's this little part in my solar plexus that gets tight. Or, you know, I start to make up stories about if I choose the wrong thing, or so there's all these things that actually happen about why I would contract around offering love in that way.
Yeah. Well, and most of those reasons are just bullshit, right? You know, I mean, they're childhood programming that we're bringing to the present moment. And so part of, you know, the idea of learning how to conduct love, and, you know, let's say there's a man watching this, right? acknowledging that those fears are real does not mean that you stop and have a discussion about them. Like, I'm afraid, like, what would have done to the evening if he would have said, you know what, I'm really nervous about ordering sparkling water for you. And I don't know, I want to. I mean, you might have found it endearing,
Mhm.
right? It might have been endearing and that vulnerability, but it's not the same as, let me order something for you. Do you like this? Right? I mean, he checked in with you. It's a slightly different variation, but it's an important one to make.
So, but specifically for this, like for this conversation, it's like, then what I'm going to is like, oh, then what do I actually need to do to open my body such that I can do it anyway? Because it's not
Practice.
just understanding.
Yeah.
It's not just understanding that it's like I can talk myself out of like that's just a belief and I should do it anyway. But actually, my body is still tight and I can try to do the things, but I'm not actually embodying the quality.
Well, there's some parts of, there's, that's a good question. And, the simple answer is practice it, right? Mm-hmm. And, this is work we do in workshops all the time. Like if you put your arm around a woman's waist with the quality of I've got this, how would it feel? How would you breathe? How would you stand? How would you look at her, right? And there are very specific ways and modalities for breathing, for looking at a woman or looking at a man, and expressing I've got this through your body, right? We're using that very specific example. Could be anything. Could be you're wonderful. Could be I adore you. Could be I worship you. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways. But so you practice it. We practice this so that we expand our nervous system. This is kind of what I wrote on the post, was it so that you expand your nervous system so that can flow regardless of the chatter in your head, because the chatter in our heads is mainly just bullshit. And we let it. The problem is that if we allow it to, if we don't override it with some kind of motion and some kind of movement, we will then close the body as those thoughts start to happen, right? So that's the general mechanism of closure. I'm afraid. I'm afraid. It's mainly it. Or sometimes I'm angry, but I'm afraid. And I'm thinking the thought. And then our body starts to do this thing, right? Versus I'm afraid, but I'm breathing, I'm moving, I'm offering it anyway. And just in that practice, you're learning how to conduct love through the body. Now, every time you do a new step, you're going to be afraid, just like stepping on stage to sing a song. And you know what I mean? Until you've got it literally installed in your nervous system to such a degree that it becomes natural.
I'm thinking, I read this Osho quote today, and it's a little different than this, but it seems like it flows into it. It was something basically to the effect of lovers don't surrender to each other, they surrender to love. And that's sort of like, oh, why would you do this? Why would you even go to the trouble of, overriding this fear and doing this thing because your partner wants it? And sometimes I think there is also that, like, why do I have to do this for her or for him or why this, that sort of a thing. And that's the why, because it's not actually, it is for her or for him, but bigger than that, it's actually for love.
Yeah, it is for love. And at the very least, it's for her. At the very most, it's for the divine or love or whatever you want to call that, right?
Yeah.
So the more, if you want to simplify this, it's more, we could say that learning how to conduct love through your body is the same as learning how to conduct the divine through your body. If you, buy that stuff, which I do. Yeah. So what about the next question? Thank you for helping us illustrate that so beautifully. What about the next?
Our next question. Well, the next question then is taking it more to that personal place. So there's, well, I guess they're both personal, but one was more about how you want to receive it. Mm-hmm. But from that place, then sometimes we can start to notice, actually, how do I habitually give love? Mm. So I think one of the things you were talking about before is like when you habitually close in these ways, you create certain grooves of I go here and I don't go here. And one is kind of, I don't go, right? Like the fear, I don't go here. But there's also these grooves we get in, like, oh, I go here, I go here, I go here. And this is what I know. And they're not bad grooves. You know, this is how I know how to have sex. This is how I know how to make sure that someone knows I love them. This is like, we could call it natural. We could call it authentic. You know, this is what's true for me or something, but they're habitual.
Yeah.
Not wrong for being habitual, but that's what they are. And so notice, they would say the first step is just to notice, what are the ways that I habitually give love?
Yeah. I'll give you an example that I see a lot, right? Which is, there's a way that couples who've been together for long periods of time touch each other, right? Like just naturally, right? And they're expressing love. It's beautiful, right? Like she puts her hand on his arm, or, you know, he puts his hand on her, you know, he strokes her hair or something like that, right? That's their habitual way of giving love, and that's beautiful. However, over the course of time, if it's done again and again and again, there's such a groove that develops that it oftentimes happens to the exception of other ways, right? Of other ways to express love, right? So one of the things that I see that crushes polarity a lot is habitual touch, because it becomes, I don't want to say thoughtless in the sense that it's not kind.
It's unconscious.
It becomes unconscious, exactly. Thank you. It becomes unconscious and it becomes habitual. And so that's what's received. I'm unconsciously and habitually kind of showing you I love you, right? Versus trying something different. So let's say you put your hand on, you know, your wife's shoulder a certain way. Well, if you wanted to try something different and just see what that did for her, you might take your left hand versus your right, and you might slide it around the small of her back, right, and pull her towards you. That's a different groove. I mean, it seems overly simple, but you're giving a different groove. Or, you know, on the extreme level, you might take her and throw her over your shoulder and like spin her around, right? That's another way of expressing love, that she might feel that as, you know, play, and that might be another thing that you don't normally do, but it's another expression of love. So I think taking stock of, you know, the half dozen go-to moves that we have in our lovemaking, in our touching, in the way that we actually look at our partner or don't, right? Or the way we, the tone of voice. Like a lot of couples have cutesy voices, right? Like, baby, you know, like, look, I've done it, you've done it, we've all done it, like where you have like, but after the course of months or years, that becomes a well-worn groove, and then expanding out of that all of a sudden becomes an issue.
Well, I mean, two things are coming up for me when you say this, and one is that it's trying something new, and so it's this new groove, and then the other piece that's coming up really is that brings consciousness.
The new groove brings consciousness, yeah.
Yeah, or the trying something new, even if you find that you don't like it, or he doesn't like it, or whatever, like there's just more consciousness to it. And so even, again, like making a list actually of, oh, these are the habitual ways that I give love. It doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't mean I shouldn't do them. But once you've seen it, you kind of can't then do it without being like, oh, I'm doing that thing.
Yeah.
And suddenly,
great
consciousness.
Great. I was going to say, if you're watching this, stop, go write on your notebook, like take 5 minutes and literally write down, what are the ways that I habitually give love, right? And start to take note of them, like Kendra's saying, because it will be hard to do it habitually ever again once you bring awareness to it.
So first, you might choose something different, right? If you notice you're just starting to put your arm around her the way you always do, you might just do something different. And then second, even if you do the same thing, you won't do it the same way.
Yeah, you'll bring more awareness to it.
Right.
Maybe you bring like a softer touch, or you can actually feel your fingers on her skin with more sensitivity, right? You know, the idea is that touch should be the expression of the heart, and, you know, maybe, you know, the gut or the genitals, really. I mean, right? You know, if you're talking about like all of you, right? So that your expression could, just a touch can convey like a myriad of energies, or a myriad of textures, a myriad of desires, right? So, learning new ways to do that, and then watching, like, wow, did that make her smile? Did that make him relax? Did that, and starting to pay attention the way that love is given and received through the body. I mean, that's very generous. And
yeah, again, it's just this broad range. So we're talking about touch, and you talked about speaking and breath, or even just quality of attention. Just the flavors of being that we bring often are the same ones over and over again, because they've worked well for us, because they're comfortable.
Yeah.
And they're so funny because the examples always seem a little bit surface, but they always touch something deeper.
True.
So like thinking about, again, another thing I think couples get into is kind of like, well, we're together already. Like, there's certain things that we might make an effort for if we were just starting to date that we don't then later on, or that we just think we shouldn't have to do. Like, I'm thinking about a time when I was going to go out with somebody, and it had been like this incredibly long day, and we were both exhausted, and it was just like, it was cold out, and all I wanted to do was like put on my sweatpants and put my cozy jacket and just go out, and that would be fine. It's fine to do that. There's no rule that one shouldn't do that, or the woman always has to get dressed up or whatever. But I noticed this part that was like, oh, I could do that, or there was this dress that I could put on, and there were these tights I could put on, and there was these boots I could put on. And actually what was stopping me from doing that, or what would have stopped me, wasn't, oh, I'm not going to be comfortable and it's too cold. And it wasn't this, it was this fear. It was like, oh, that's so obvious. I'm doing it for him. Mm. And then it was like the thought went through my mind, and I caught it right in the middle. And I thought, what is so bad about doing something on purpose for another person because I know they would like it? Like, why in the world would that be shameful? But it felt like that. And so that was like the little part that wanted to close, was like, oh, there's something a little bit shameful about on purpose getting dressed up for somebody.
So here's the piece that I think is so important about that, is that you just pointed to a perfect example of how conducting love, trying to conduct more love or offer more of ourselves generously, touches the unconscious programming of our childhood and our, habitual programming, right? And so what we bump into, the reasons why people inevitably like stop doing this or don't do it, is just what you talked about, right? Just some piece of some belief system or something that's usually old. Usually this is old stuff, right? And once you drill down, right, and you really like ask the question, yeah, like, so what's wrong for doing it for him? What's wrong in doing it for her? Making her feel safe, or guys have this issue, especially in long-term relationship, is creating plans, making plans, creating a container for a date, and making sure that she feels that he's got every piece of this handled. And some guys at the end of a long day don't want to do that. Like, that takes a lot of work and effort, and and yet it makes her feel the way you felt the other night. Like, yeah, it feels good when you handle this, right? I think that's a really great place to take this.
Yeah, and I guess the piece I do want to say about that just is like, I may actually discover what that was, or I may not. But catching it and being conscious about it allowed me to make a different choice.
Yeah. Well, which is why we're having people ask these questions, right? So, okay, is there another question? Can we do another question?
Well, I think we touched on it. Really, the next one was about, they were taking it to the body. The questions were taking it to the body and really looking at, how do I know when I'm resisting expressing love? So
how do I close?
Yeah. In the body. Oh, where do I close? And I would say the reciprocal is, how do I know when I'm opening to expressing love?
Yeah. So the questions were, how do I know that I'm closing?
Yes.
Right? Like, how do I know that I'm resisting giving love, or my body's not available to give love, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a great question for people to check. Like,
yeah, can you put a little, as you ask that question, I'm noticing the thing that I will often notice first is something more, or like I'll catch myself coming up with reasons why I don't need to do something, or why it's the other person's fault. There's some reason that comes first that will then point me to actually looking in my body.
Sure. So I think that's good for people to notice, because these grooves, again, get, when people have fear or resentment or shame, usually there's thoughts associated with it, right? Beliefs associated with it. But then what happens after that is that the body starts to react in kind, because the body mind is really one unit, right? It's one connected symbiotic unit. So those beliefs will actually cause maybe someone's breath to shorten, right? Or someone's shoulders to tighten, or someone's shoulders to shrug, or their belly to get hard, or their head to drop, or their jaw to tighten. I mean, it's important, I think, as a meditation and part of the practice of really getting aware as a coach of what's happening, to your clients, or what's happening to you, like by being aware of, like, oh, her neck's tightening, right? Or his shoulders are tightening. He just clenched his jaw, right? Stop breathing. All of these things are things that we have to get aware of, so that we can start to become aware, not only in our romantic life, but in our clients as well, right? Like, we can see what happens.
So we've touched on this, but really the question then, or the place to really take this, both, I would say both personally, and then it is true as coaches, is really noticing where in our bodies we contract, where what happens when we're resisting conducting love, and on the reciprocal side is actually noticing, like, how do I know when I'm opening to giving more love? And that often there's something that precedes that. That was a piece that I was noticing, like, in looking at that question, was that I'll often, like recently I noticed this, I'll catch myself either kind of like making minor criticisms of a person, or sort of noticing the way that I think they're not showing up fully, so I don't need to show up fully. There's like some rationale that I have, and then I can kind of go in and check, and I'm like, oh, I'm closing like this, or I'm, I've done some process in which I'm now more removed, or I'm, yeah.
Well, a couple things I'd say about that. The first is that, the body and the mind are absolutely connected. So those thoughts, like, he's not showing up, or he's kind of a putz, or he doesn't know how to order a bottle of water, or whatever, right? Those have reciprocal tensions that come in the body, right? So as we start to feel shame, or criticism, or resentment, or anger, our body responds in kind, like with shortening of breath, or tightening of solar plexus, or collapsing of the chest, or tightening of the jaw, in any number of ways. Some people like twitch their fingers. It's crazy what our bodies do, right? So it's just important that we, as a meditation, as an awareness practice, we start to get clear on, oh, here's what I'm doing that is, instead of me relaxing and letting love flow. And then the second thing I would bring to that is, let's say, for example, you're with a guy and he's not conscious, so he's not paying attention. He's, he looks at a girl walking by. That's a classic example. Well, you could tighten and criticize and kind of have a lot of thoughts about it. She's prettier than me, or whatever the thing is. Or you could, grab him by the shoulder and stomp your feet, or you could pound on his chest in in a way to express your hurt, or your playful, you're playing with him about that. There's lots of ways you could express love in that way that aren't closing down, right?
Mhm.
And it doesn't always have to be pretty. Like, you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like women especially think, oh, it's got to be sweet and pretty. Well, no, you can like, you know, grab the guy by the collar and go, I'm over here, asshole, right?
Right.
And if your heart's open and you're expressing love, then yeah, you're conducting love through the body in a way that's authentic and open, right? You know, within reason, obviously, scratching, you know, hitting him, scratching him. But there's some of that that I think is important that for women to get, that it's not, doesn't always have to be sweet and tender. It can be, you know, wrathful and heartbroken,
Mhm.
right? And that's, I think, tricky for a lot of women to get. And, you know, and yet men will always respond better to that, almost always, unless they're
Yeah, I
just
don't
really,
know if it's like if this is something that I don't know culturally like where this got, but you know, especially now because there is so much kind of like self-help where we all, you know, we've all read like the way we should talk to each other. I mean, they're beautiful practices, things like nonviolent communication and what have you, but it's sort of there does then tend to be this thing like, okay, I need to go back and like process what I felt. I need to like realize that it's just my childhood wound, but then I can bring it and I can say, oh, I was really hurt. But everything that's happening in between is that I'm like contracting around that thing that happened rather than just moving it.
yeah. Yeah, so I think that those practices are fantastic and very helpful as long as you're moving the energy through the body and expressing love through the body. If you're doing those while you're gripping and tight and contracted and not expressing love, then what the fuck are you doing it for? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's what's the good? And so it's, those are both tools. You know, one, I think we're more culturally accustomed to, right? Like, you know, here's why I was hurt. You know, when you said this, I felt this. And, you know, that's a way of doing it, but it's kind of antiseptic and it's not particularly hot, right? Whereas, you know, if if I'm with you and I look at another girl walking by and you pinch me, and then I look at you and you like hiss at me, right? There's actually like a, you know, but you're kind of, you're still open, right? There's kind of a, you know, there's a connection, there's an honest expression of how you were feeling in the moment,
Yeah.
right? That creates a deeper, you know, a deeper exchange of energy, which is really what love is.
And once again, I'm just like present to how vulnerable that is. Like, yes, it's vulnerable to come to you and say like, oh, I felt really hurt when you looked at that other woman. And there's like a certain vulnerability, but it's more vulnerable to like, you know, pinch you and express, like that's way more vulnerable actually.
Right. Right. Oh, so that's a great example. It is until you practice it a few times, right? You know what I mean? Like a practice I give a lot of women, right? When they're angry, right? Rather than like do the habitual complain about something he's doing, I say, no, 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 like stomp your foot, like stomp your foot and pinch him or smack him on the shoulder and like, you know, and like just, you know, growl at him or hiss at him or something like that so that he can feel,
Yeah.
you know, how he hurt you or how his unconsciousness hurt you. And you're right, it is vulnerable and hard for a lot of women, but when they do it, the first thing they notice is that the guy kind of smiles
Yeah.
and laughs, right? If it's done with some amount of artfulness, right? And that's a perfect example of finding a new way and creating a new groove to conduct love through your body. I think that's a fantastic example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because most people will go to the, you know, at least the circles you and I run in, we will go into that kind of authentic communication, and it's great, but it just lacks the, it doesn't, it isn't in service to love in the way that I think Osho would have wanted it to be in service to love.
Yeah, or I mean, I guess it's just important to say like these things weave together. And, you know, we talked about habitual grooves at the beginning of this conversation. And so if you have a habitual groove, like this is how we process our resentment and our anger,
Right.
and,
Right.
you know, jealousy, and like that's just a habit. And so there's also these other ways. It's not sort of to say never do that one, or you know, but like,
Yeah.
oh, that one, you know what, you're probably never gonna forget how to do that one. You've done it a lot of times, you've
Right.
got it down, like it's good, it's gonna come back, even if you throw it out for a little while.
Right.
You know.
Right. 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 And these are tools,
Yeah.
right? And every occasion might call, you know, some occasions might call for one tool, some occasion might call for another. But in the interest of this topic, which is expressing love, learning how to conduct love through the body, you know, trying what is not necessarily comfortable is definitely going to grant your nervous system access to more of you, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of the goal.
That just, for me, it brings it back right to that first thing, which is about just that wide range of conducting. And so there is actually value. There's the specifics that we're talking about, but there's actually value just in this broadening of your exploration. You just touched on this, expanding your nervous system, and just actually doing a lot of different things like that, that expands, like surround sound.
Yeah, for example, like, this is silly, but, like, let's say the next time you get mad at a man you're with, right? If you sang it, I fucking hate you, right? I mean, you'd be expressing it, and you would be expanding your nervous system so that you wouldn't get into the habitual, like, you did it again, you always, you never, the kind of shit people do. We do, everybody does.
Yeah.
And so there's so much more of us available. I think this is a good place to end, right? There's so much more of us available, if we're willing to try different ways of expressing ourselves and being creative in how we express our love and how we allow love to move through the body. And look, this is a huge subject. We'd even talk about archetypes, or the way that people, the way, you and I've done workshops where, like, there's some, archetypes being expressed, and it's felt as love,
Yes.
right? It's felt as love to the partner. And, that's a huge part of this. And like I said, a huge subject. So more for another time.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you that did watch this, I hope you did your homework, and please feel free to, ask us any questions or comment in any way that you need to.